I've heard people call it harmonized structure as well. So if our listeners have heard that term, it's the same thing. But the beauty is that if you have any standard, maybe some of our listeners have ISO 9001, the structure is exactly the same, the headings at least. The first one is context, clause 4, leadership, clause 5, planning, clause 6, resources or support, clause 7. Clause 8, operations, 9, performance evaluation, and 10, improvement. If you have one built, you can just modify it slightly for any other standard you want to integrate into your management system.
Welcome to Secure and Simple podcast. In this podcast, we demystify cybersecurity governance, compliance with various standards and regulations, and other topics that are of interest for consultants, CISOs, and other cybersecurity professionals. Hello, I'm Dejan Kosutic, the CEO at Advisora and the host of Secure and Simple podcast. Now, today we have a very interesting guest. His name is Jim Moran, and he's the founder of Simplify ISO. And he has a very big experience with consulting, more than 30 years, and with various ISO standards like ISO 9001 and others. And he's also the host of Simplify ISO podcast, and he's also the member of committee, ISO committee 280, and this is for guidance for management consultancy services, and for this is related to the standard ISO 20700 standard. So lots of experience with various ISO standards. So in today's podcast, you'll learn what is this high-level structure of ISO management standards, and basically how to use this to integrate various ISO standards and to create these integrated management systems, for example, ISO 27001 and ISO 9001 or any other standards. So, welcome to the show, Jim.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Dan. It's been I enjoyed working with you with our other podcast a couple of weeks ago, so it's nice to have sort of a connection, you might say. So thanks again for having me on.
Great to have you here, Jim. And yeah, let's start. So, what is this high-level structure, or HLS, and why is it actually important?
Well, first of all, it started in 2013 with the standard you're most familiar with, 27001. And I didn't really get it when I first saw it. But I really liked the fact that they were working together or working on some kind of structure that could be used in different standards. And to date, I think you've seen it in 27,001, 14,001, the environmental standard, 45,001, health and safety, 50,001, energy. It's even in 56,001, the asset management standard. So it was a brilliant move on ISO's part. I have a feeling they might have felt that the ISO 9001 registrations, which there are more than 2 million of in the world, might have been slipping a bit. And so they probably helped design this high-level structure format. I've heard people call it harmonized structure as well. So if our listeners have heard that term, it's the same thing. But the beauty is that if you have any standard, maybe some of our listeners have ISO 9001, the structure is exactly the same, the headings at least. The first one is context, clause 4, leadership, clause 5, planning, clause 6, resources or support, clause 7. Clause 8, operations, 9, performance evaluation, and 10, improvement. If you have one built, you can just modify it slightly for any other standard you want to integrate into your management system. And there are many advantages we'll get to in a minute. But 2015 came along, and here's ISO 9001 now, using the same format that 27001 did in 2013. 14,001 environmental came
Yeah.
out the same year, and it's just been a terrific. I guess you'd say it was probably a paradigm shift for ISO because each area of
Hmm.
expertise was pretty protective of its own format for making standards. And as you probably know, 13485 medical devices still has their own format, and 17025 calibration and testing still has its old format, and 15189 medical labs is the same as 17025. So with our listeners hearing this whole swirl of numbers, suffice to say that I think the others will come along. I think they'll kind of be left in the dust if they don't, from an ISO, from an international standards perspective, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I noticed that once you compare all of these standards, and by the way, this 42001, the AI standard, is also following the high level structure.
Yes.
Anyway, when you compare all of these standards, I have an impression that clauses 4 context, clause 5, the management and clause. Especially 4 and 5 and 9, which is about maintenance and let's say and measurement, and clause 10, they're basically almost the same amongst these standards. Where their differences are mostly around clauses, let's say, especially 8 and 6, right?
Mhm.
Clause 7 is also almost the same. So, do you also see this kind of pattern between these standards, and why are only these 2 clauses really so different?
Well, it's a good question. I think, as you pointed out, the biggest differences are in Clause 8 operations, because every field of endeavor, every industry, every company, and so on, they deliver their service or build their product uniquely for their own, first of all, the industry, and of course, within each of the hundreds of thousands of industries in the world, there are requirements related to legal requirements that go along with those. So it would have been pretty difficult for an organization, for ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, would have been hard for them to come up with a generic enough clause 8 operations, but
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but with enough detail to be worthwhile or usable by various companies. So the result is, as you just suggested, that some standards, I'm thinking of health and safety, has 8.1 general, 8.2 is emergency preparedness and response. That might be it for them, what I'm thinking now. And then we think of quality, or especially your area of expertise, 27,001. Not only is there a pretty extensive Clause 8, there's an Annex A with
Yeah.
93 separate requirements. I love the way they set that up, by the way. It
Hmm.
looks to me, it reminds me of Ishikawa's fishbone diagram. The man would be the people, 6 methods would be operations, or I guess the organizational one, the first one would be like the milieu in his man method milieu.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of good thinkers out there, but the eight is definitely the biggest one. That's usually how I start explaining, integrating to any of my clients, is that, since you have ISO X, Y, Z, whatever it happens to be, you're going to have all these things in place. And I guess the other, because 8 is so different, or so unique to each standard, as you said, 6, the risk assessment, it will be equally unique, because although the methodology can be the same, a lot of clients use
Hmm.
ISO 31000 as guidance. In the 27,000 world, 27,005 a specific guidance document, 27,007 for internal auditing. So if anybody's listening is venturing into information security, and if you aren't, you should be, you'll find lots of help. I was especially pleased to see 27,002, where you have,
Uh-huh.
if you do it mathematically, you have almost a page and a half of explanation for every one of the 93 clauses in Annex A.
Yeah.
So there's lots of help for people. The other one I love of that series too is 27,036 Part 2, the information security standard for the supply chain. I mean, the supply chain came under everybody's magnifying glass during COVID
Yeah.
when we saw how critical it was for survival. And I think everybody inherently knows, like, your supply chain is the lifeblood of your organization.
Mhm. Oh, going back to clause 6, what I noticed is that, yeah, there are differences, let's say, especially in this approach to risk management. And one of the specifics in ISO 27001 is this statement of applicability, right? And
Yes,
actually,
yes,
this was for a longer time, this was the only standard which requires this statement of applicability directly related to this Annex A, right?
yes.
And then I saw the 42,001, the AI standard, has the same concept, right? They
Mm-hmm.
have this Annex A with controls and the statement of applicability in clause 6, which basically regulates or specifies which of these controls are applicable. So, but this is unique for these two standards.
Yes.
I didn't really see it anywhere in any other of these ISO
I
standards,
can't
right?
think of any other
Now,
standard where it's as prominent. And when you see it, it makes so much sense for an
mhm, mhm.
organization to take the time to go through all of these requirements and maybe look for ways to see that it would apply. And the
Mhm.
only, I guess I've done a half a dozen 27,000 ones now. Nothing compared to your vast accomplishments there, but I did notice that in any company, in varied companies as well, there everything still applies. About the only exception that in my particular realm was the writing of software. That's the section that says if you develop software, most of my clients or all my clients just use it. They none have developed it.
Yeah,
So I imagine that creates a whole nother special set of challenges, if I might say.
yeah, definitely. Now, this Annex A, right? So it has, I would say, I think all these standards do have annexes, but this Annex A is particularly important, as we mentioned in 27001 and 42001. Is there also with other ISO standards, are these annexes in either ISO standards also important, or they have less, let's say, meaning?
Well, in the Annex A that you and I know in 27,001, it isn't guidance, it's requirements, 93 requirements. And the other annexes that I've used are just guidance document. And
Mhm.
even in a guidance document like 19,011, the auditing document, it even has annexes. Also, not shells. They're shoulds or may, and it makes a big difference. But I find them very helpful for people building systems, just in the sense that it gives you another perspective, it gives you something to think about. But nowadays, I'd say in the last 2 years, for me anyway, I started using AI for writing or creating webinars for BSI. And we did 10 years of that with them, just finished last year, actually earlier this year. And the incredible upswing of knowledge I hope improvement to management systems with AI. It's almost unfathomable. It's literally infinite. Well, it isn't, but it feels like it's infinite. So that all the annexes in the other standards can certainly be enhanced with using AI as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, but the point I'm trying to make here is that basically this high-level structure does not really cover annexes, right? Basically, these annexes are, I would say, quite different from one standard to
Oh,
another.
completely. Absolutely. Thanks. Good point. The high level structure didn't doesn't require annexes, but every standard I've seen has them. But yes, the one standard, one exception is the one that you and I use with information security, 27002.
Hmm.
But the annexes sometimes get overlooked. It's a good thing that you're raising this point. There's lots of valuable information in there in every single ISO standard. And sometimes people say, oh, I don't need to worry about that because they're not requirements, except in the case of 27,001 and 42,001, the AI standard. But
Hmm.
it's good to, I guess there was, if I could list the other standards we've talked about, 9,001, for example, 45,001 health and safety, 14,001 environmental, even though they have companion documents that are like ISO 27002, help guidance, examples, and so on. The other standards have just hey, they haven't embraced it quite the same way, and I think because they aren't requirements, people tend to overlook them. And in my opinion, they're, as I think you would agree, they're missing a lot of really valuable information in there that could help them. Back to clause 10, improvement could certainly help them find ways to improve their management system for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Now, how is this high-level structure related to integrated management systems? What is the connection, let's say, between them?
Well, if a person had to integrate a system, let's say when 1996, when ISO 14001 first came out, I
Hmm.
think that was my first attempt at integration. It was a company in Ontario, Canada, southwestern Ontario, in Burlington, and they took manufactured steel wire and turned it into frameworks, sometimes just bundles of cut wire, and so on and so forth. And they were required by the automotive industry to become ISO 14001 certified. It wasn't right at in 96, it was probably closer to 2000 or 2001. So, having worked already for, let's see, since 92, 18 years with ISO 9001, I could see some of the language of the clause requirements being similar. And so we went to work, and we didn't write a whole separate ISO 14001 environmental management system. We took the parts that were similar enough and added them to the quality system. And that was my first exposure to this concept, and it went fine. They got certified to both standards. And because of that, I started to see where integration would be easier moving forward. But when the 2015 version came out, it was like a whole new world opened up because I could see immediately how much easier it was going to be to do that kind of work. And more companies are required by their customers to be certified to more than one standard. 27,001 is probably the most popular and fastest growing, but for most people that make, especially construction companies, ISO 9001 for the quality, 45,001 for health and safety, and then obviously if you're working in construction, 14,001 on the environmental side. So it's again probably driven by customers. I remember in 1996 going out to Vancouver with SGS. I was the training manager at the time, and there were maybe 50 or 80 people in the room, but 90% of them were interested in adopting ISO 14001, not to save the environment, but to avoid getting fined and to start to manage their compliance requirements to all the legal requirements. And of course, the legal requirements in every country when it comes to environmental are changing. I won't say daily, but they change. I think we have 14 or 15,000 of
Hmm.
pages of new environmental legislation in Canada alone, and we're a
Yeah.
pretty small country.
Hmm. Now, going back to integration and
Yes.
integrated management systems, how does this really look in practice? So let's say that a company wants to implement both ISO 9001 and let's say 27001. What exactly can they integrate, and how does this reflect, I don't know, documents, processes, technologies, people, whatever?
Well, it's not as maybe as hard as it sounds. It's requires a lot of work and it requires a lot of paying attention to detail. But if you go to clause 4.4.1 A and B in ISO 9001, and by the way, the other standards I hope over time will adopt the same language. But
Hmm.
4.4.1 A and B talk about, first of all, A is identify the processes you need in your organization to meet your requirements, customer requirements, legal requirements. It doesn't say all that detail, but that's the idea. And 4.4.1b says determine the inputs and outputs, show their interaction. I think A is determine the inputs and outputs, B is show the interaction. So for years, the first step I've done with my clients is to get some sticky notes up on the wall with flip chart paper, and I asked them, so what happens between the time the customer calls and the money goes in the bank? So we map out all the steps in their company. And by using that technique, the integration becomes so much easier because you can go to the first box and say, okay, what's the deal with quality? And you can, again, imagine identifying risks using this technique. It's pretty good.
Hmm.
It's not foolproof, but it's pretty good. So what are the risks related to the first phone call with the customer? Next, what are the risks related with determining their requirements? And then at that point, you can add in environmental. Are there any requirements related to environmental issues, climate change, even that latest amendment? Then health and safety. Oh, so if the customer wants this, if we have to handle sulfuric acid, we've got both environmental and health and safety. The good news about that first step is there are really no information security issues, but there certainly are when you're dealing with your customer. Are we talking to the customer while we're sitting in Starbucks, or are we on a secure network? And you just go step by step by step by step, and you can literally look at every step of your organization, start to finish, and decide. And a cross-functional team is certainly helpful for this, but you can decide if there are any issues, and while you're doing that, you can build your integrated system.
Hmm. So basically, if I understood well, you're saying that the, let's say, implementation steps of two standards can actually be merged, especially if you go, if you take this high level view of actually processes and identify them both from, let's say, quality and security point of view.
Yes, exactly correct. And the other thing that most of our listeners would be happy to hear is that there are some significant cost savings from having your registrar audit your system as an integrated system rather than two or three or four separate systems.
Hmm. Yeah, of course, when a company goes for a certification. Now, how does this integration look, for example, when you're writing documents? For example, what I found is that if you're writing a procedure for document and record control, you don't have to write two documents, right? For 9001 and 27, you're simply writing one document which covers document record control for both of these systems. But how do you normally approach this, let's say, integrated management systems when writing documents?
That was a good example you gave, Dan, the document control requirement. But think about the
Hmm.
others. Internal auditing, another critical tool to managing or benefiting from a management system. Auditing is auditing is auditing. Doesn't matter if you're auditing. Now, your auditors need to have special skills for each area, but you could very easily
Hmm.
have an integrated audit team. Maybe they wouldn't be auditing,
Hmm.
maybe not walking around the organization together as a little herd, but meeting during the day, comparing notes, and so on. And you wouldn't have to have a separate, even risk identification methodology. It can be the same for all. Now,
Uh,
health and safety has some specific requirements, and 27001 information security has specific
yeah,
requirements
yeah.
related to health and safety, adds the concept of hazards, of course. But just
Hmm.
the I guess the working together can really enhance. You kind of get a synergy happening there. But back to your question about writing the documents, um, management review will be identical. Just have the
Hmm.
other areas.
Yeah,
Corrective action. I've
yeah,
got
yeah.
when we design ours in our clients' sites, we just have a drop down. Is this quality? Is it environmental? Is it health and safety?
Hmm.
Is it information
Yeah, yeah.
security? So you can virtually use the same system for all of them, and
Hmm.
I think as a hope for me, for the larger clients, I'm hoping that the integration of the management system can actually help break down silos that you've seen in every company you've worked with, I'm sure. Even
Yeah,
even
yeah, definitely.
even smaller companies, people have sort of a desire to hold on to their stuff. So
Mhm.
I think the whole movement of integrating management systems can definitely help people. It's got to improve. It'll improve communication without a doubt between all the various departments. And I used to show videos when I was a college professor back in the early 80s before I started ISO. There was a really great line in one of the videos I showed. It goes like this: communication is a synonym for life. So if you take that to a corporate setting, anything that can improve communication is going to improve the corporation for sure, no question about it. And integrating management systems, in my view, is one of the best ways to improve internal communications for sure.
Definitely, yeah. Now, this kind of integration can actually go further. I mean, it will, of course, enhance communication. And in many cases, actually, you can integrate not only, let's say, documents, but you can integrate, let's say, activities between a couple of standards. For example, you can actually have the same internal auditor doing 9001 and, let's say, 27001. Of course, if this person has the knowledge of both of these areas. But how do you actually manage these, I would say, smaller differences then? For example, if you have one procedure for management review, the, let's say, inputs and outputs for a management review for 9001 are slightly different from the ones from 27001. So how do you integrate, let's say, management reviews, but yet actually keep these differences separate and clear? How do you manage this?
It's a good question. Thanks. First of all, management review is fundamentally the same, but have specifics for the specific standards. For example, 45,001 has a requirement for top management to include workers in discussions,
Mhm.
having a formal method for communicating. And so in a management review, after you're finished all the core ones, then you'd have, and of course the vice presidents and so on will be around the table. You would just take the next step and say, so let's look at how well we all included workers in our discussions. Workers need to be included in the creation of quality objectives, for example, or not quality objectives, health and safety management objectives. They need to be included in designing work and so on. So the core is the same, and even management responsibility. Management shall demonstrate commitment. Uh, Quality now has 10, environmental has 9, health and safety has 13. So as it's, but the core of everything is consistent across all these standards. And then you just add the specifics for each area, AI, and
Yeah.
information security as well. Back in the 90s, the late 90s, the automotive industry took ISO 9000 and created a document called QS 9000. And it was basically ISO 9001. But then they had, like we have today with the annexes, that had Chrysler requirements, Ford requirements, and GM requirements. And you could sort of think along the same parallel lines with your integrated management system, that you've got the core, it's the same, but then some areas that would require, so, specific, required being addressed slightly uniquely for their particular. But every standard can learn from the other standard. All
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
all the standards could learn from Clause 8 in ISO 9001 when it talks about the beginning, measurements, competent people, finding ways to eliminate like error proofing, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So basically have, let's say, one procedure for management review and then maybe separate checklists for each standard, or maybe working instructions for each standard, something like
You
this.
could have the agenda. The agenda would probably be able to take care of that. Have the core ones. Then the next item would
Yeah.
be for health and safety. Next item would be, or you could even look at, let's say, process effectiveness. So internal auditing. So you could have input from the health and safety side, the environmental side, and the quality side, and the information security side. Have somebody from each area, or have the person responsible for all of the integrated management system just reflect on, were there any specific issues in information security, were there any uncontrolled areas of health and safety,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's the language is so similar as well. Not only is it harmonized, but they haven't just tweaked little words to try to be different in all the different standards. They've really maintained a good, solid, consistent tone and message all the way through, for sure.
Mhm. Okay. And when a company, let's say that the company has both QMS and ISMS, right? That they have this integrated management system, and if they want to do the management review, do actually they do the management review for both of these systems at the same time, or is it better actually to do them as two separate management reviews?
My clients, I don't know what yours do, but my clients do them together. And what I've discovered happens is we get this term you're familiar with called synergy, where 1 + 1 = 3. And as far as the information security goes, information, as you know so very well, when it's sitting still, it's not that hard to protect it. But when it's moving, it's a whole different story. So when you think about how any organization operates, they've all got data stored someplace and they have lots of protection on it. But every organization that's in business is sending data back and forth constantly, internally and externally both, so that when we think in terms of reviewing how effective the data is being protected and how well we're doing quality, they're actually they're really intertwined, because when you're building either products or delivering a service, you're moving data constantly. So to have the two sides talking together at management review can be a huge bonus for any organization, especially as we mentioned earlier, the communication part.
Mhm. Because very often what I found with the companies that have both QMS and ISMS is that usually they find that the targeted audience for management review are different for security and for quality. For example, for security, it's usually the CTO, the technology officer, I don't know, security officer, maybe CIO, chief information officer, whereas the targeted audience for quality is usually are these officers who are more on the operational and the manufacturing side, right? So
Yes, I can see.
how do we actually?
Yeah, go
Mhm.
ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so the question is really, how to bring them together and how to show them this benefit of let's say talking together.
Well, if they're having a hard time getting together, it might be a little hint that there's some silos going on in a company like that. And I have to tell you, a president of a IT or communication company in Northern Ontario told me once that he'd hired a consultant to come in and he built himself as a silo breaker. And he said, what I discovered is that if you can punch a hole in a silo, it's actually a self-healing hole. So any holes you can put in silos will heal themselves, and you're back to where you started. So this activity we're talking about now is a perfect opportunity for any organization to start breaking down silos. And it wouldn't make as much sense if one division of a company was milking cows and another division was making chips, microchips. But most of the companies you and I deal with, they're kind of a unified company trying to get the service delivered or the product out the door. And once companies realize that information security and quality they're really woven so tightly together that you can start making a case for those people, all those people, to be around the table when especially if you have interim management checkups, like maybe a quarterly review or a monthly review. The more representatives you can get from the different parts of the company, the more value you'll get out of that meeting for sure.
Mhm. Okay. Now, if a company doesn't have, any standard and
Uh,
they want to go for both, let's say for two standards, right?
yes.
Let's say, okay, ISO 27001 and then ISO 42001. Of course, they would like to integrate them, but is it easier actually to start one and then complete the project and start with another? Or is it better to actually start two standards in parallel and then integrate them on the go? So, what is your experience
Well,
there?
my experience has been that if you start with quality, and no matter
Hmm.
what your organization is, if you get quality in place first, it increases the odds that you're going to be more sustainable. And as you pointed out, the audiences are different, and there's a high risk that if you did both at one time, that you could have some sort of political issues that you wouldn't have anticipated otherwise. Territorialism, that kind of thing, people not wanting to share information because they think it takes power away from them. There's a whole bunch of potential catastrophes waiting if you do them both at once. And the companies I've worked with have been small enough, although I did work with some larger global multinationals, but the sort of, I guess, 97% of the companies in the world, at least in Canada, I don't know about where you are, Dejan, but they are under 100 people, like most organizations, and then 80% of those are fewer than 50. So when you have small companies, they don't have large well-paid teams to implement these management systems. I wouldn't say it's as bad as somebody trying to do it in their spare time on the corner of their desk, but definitely if you can stay focused on one standard just to get started, and that's again one more fantastic benefit of this harmonized structure or the high-level structure. If you do one, it would probably reduce the time for the second one by about 80%. But more importantly,
Yeah.
they would definitely be much more harmonized, and much more integrated, much more powerful, really. And you can. The other thing that we haven't talked about is when you do a nonconformance or do a corrective action from a nonconformance to do the root cause. A lot of times they are also, when we're talking about quality and information security, they can be linked. But you wouldn't find that out if you did it as two separate non-conformances. And the other thing is that you can get that, again, that word I used earlier, find a non-conformance, do a corrective action in quality. You'll likely be able to figure something out, some way to benefit from that effort in information security as well, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So by having the systems well integrated from like do one, add the other one, use the same cross-functional teams as much as you can, you just get incredible benefits.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. Makes sense. Now, let's talk a little bit about 9001. Basically, the new draft international standard is published for 9001, and the, let's say, regular 9001 is expected next year, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, reading this new ISO 9001, do you actually see any changes in this high-level structure, or is the high-level structure going to stay the same?
No changes to the structure at all. And even the changes to the requirements themselves. A couple of little things like management responsibility clause 5.1.1. In the current version, the very first statement is management shall take accountability for the effectiveness of the system. That got moved down to number 11. For some reason, I have no idea why, but because to me, that's the most important thing that management's right off the bat. Anyway, so there was that movement, and they added one new requirement. There are just little tweaks here and there. They've added the amendment, of course. They made it an official part of the amendment about determine whether climate change is a factor, that kind of thing. So, but definitely to the high level structure, no change whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's
And so is this change going to, I mean, usually other standards are following what is happening in 9001. So do you see any similar changes in 14,001, maybe 27,001, 42,001?
The only place that at this point, and I just finished working with Howard, our host from last time. We just did a podcast earlier today and I went through clause by clause through all the whole standard, and there's really no reason for me to think that they would make any changes other than just the slight surface changes to common clauses. We did see a big change, you and I, in the annex in 27,001. That between the 2013 and then the 2022, I thought it was a great change they made. Instead of 14 sections, 4 sections, and of course you know me, simplify, keep it simple, and then to see them line up with the Ishikawa fishbone diagram concept was great. But I'm not. I wouldn't imagine that anything is going to change as much this time as it did between the 2008 and the 2015. It's the same thing happened with 87 and 94, just a few modifications. 94 to 2000 was a huge change. 2000, 2008, bit of modification, and 2008 to 2015, huge change. But having seen that evolution over the last 33 years, uh, this model they have now, to me, is it's going to take quite something to make a change to the structure. They could possibly in the future add a whole section on ethics, maybe, but it can already be built into leadership. Like it's not, and of course,
Uh-huh.
I
Uh-huh.
think most of our listeners would realize, or they likely know, you can't have less than what the standard requires, but you can add whatever you want.
Yeah.
And so
Uh,
other than that, it's pretty good.
mhm. It's interesting that you mentioned this that maybe ethics could be something that would be added. How about actually these new things like okay, cybersecurity and AI especially? Do you think that ISO standards in general will have to change because of these new trends?
Well, they'll certainly have to address them somehow, because 20 years ago, nobody had even heard of artificial intelligence, and 2 years ago, everybody has heard of artificial intelligence, and
Yeah.
and I think top management needs to be aware that their employees are using AI. And I wouldn't say
Hmm.
whether they want them to or not. Any enlightened top management is encouraging their people to use AI to become more productive. But along with that increased use comes increased risk. As you know, even things like developing a bias on the side of AI, the way they answer your questions based on the questions you've asked. So there are
Yeah.
some real challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Okay, let's try to wrap up today's
Okay.
conversation. And what would you kind of give as a top suggestions for consultants and for practitioners when implementing these integrated management systems? What would you say are the couple of main points to keep in mind?
Number one point, top management has to understand what's going on and they have to say, yes, we'll do whatever it takes. The very first system I did in 1992, I had taught the owner's son at college and I left my college position and started working on my own. And the president said to me, I know you're going to do a great job, Jim, but I'm really busy. So don't bother me at all during the development of this system, but be sure to call me when they come to take the picture with the plaque up on the building. And that's exactly the opposite to what people need to be thinking about when it comes to ISO. Even the Japanese, they'll send they'll send the president. They'll send the president to take the lead auditor course. 2 days of intensive exploring the standard, a day of internal auditing, a day of lead auditing. And in North America, we tend to send anybody but the president. And in North America, we tend to give the president a 3 hour overview. So in this side of the world, we need to be more aware of how critical top management's role is. So
Yeah, definitely.
for practitioners, I would say spend the time right at the beginning with the team, the senior management team, explain to them everything. And if they don't like the idea, move on, find another client because it's a world of hurt when top management isn't either understanding mainly, but also not supportive. They just want the certificate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great. Thank you for these insights. It's been a great talking to you today, Jim.
Thanks, Dan, and good luck as you're moving ahead as well. And hopefully, we'll do one of these together again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I was enjoying this.
Good.
So thanks again.
Okay.
And thanks everyone for listening or watching this podcast. And see you again in 2 weeks' time in our new episode of Secure and Simple podcast.
Thanks. Bye for now.
Thanks for making it this far in today's episode of Secure and Simple podcast. Here's some useful info for consultants and other professionals who do cybersecurity governance and compliance for a living. On Advisora website, you can check out various tools that can help your business. For example, Conformio software enables you to streamline and scale ISO 27001 implementation and maintenance for your clients. White label documentation toolkits for NIS2, DORA, ISO 27001 and other ISO standards enable you to create all the required documents for your clients. Accredited lead auditor and lead implementer courses for various standards and frameworks enable you to show your expertise to potential clients. And a learning management system called Company Training Academy with numerous videos for NIS2, DORA, ISO 27001 and other frameworks enable you to organize training and awareness programs for your clients' workforce. Check out the links in the description below for more information. If you like this podcast, please give it a thumbs up. It helps us with better ranking, and I would also appreciate if you share it with your colleagues. That's it for today. Stay safe.